Chapter 1. The Sword. Privileged was I, Callias of Shamar, above all my brethren amongst the scribes of Aquilonia, to have heard from the lips of my king, Conan the Great, the story of his travails and the high adventures that befell him along the way to the summit of his greatness. Here is the tale, as he told it to me in the later days of his reign, when age had laid its fell hand upon him, albeit lightly. On a rocky ridge swept clear of snow, a man and a boy braced themselves against the fury of the storm. All about them, like a demon, the night wind howled. Lightning rent the tortured sky, smiting rocks asunder, and lashing the shuddering earth with a whip of fire. The man, burly and bearded like a troll, appeared in the fitful light to be of gigantic stature, as he stood, legs apart, his massive frame wrapped in furs against the bite of the wind. The boy, likewise shielded from the cold, was perhaps 9 years old. Flinging back his cloak to float like a flag against the nighted sky, the man drew from its scabbard an enormous two-handed sword, the weapon of a god. As he chanted an ancient rune spell, compounded of strange words and an unearthly rhythm, he thrust the blade upward into the heart of the tempest. With mighty legs outspread against the buffetings of the wind, he brandished the splendid sword aloft, while the lowering clouds churned about him, as if the brand had pierced and wounded the very firmament. "Hearken, Conan!" shouted the man above the roar of the storm. "Fire and wind are born in the womb of the heavens, the children of the sky gods. And the mightiest of the gods is Father Crom, who ruleth earth and heaven and the broad and restless sea. Many secrets there be, whereof Crom is master, but the greatest of these is the secret of steel, a secret which the gods taught not to men, but jealously guarded in their inmost hearts." The boy stared up into the huge man's face, as stern in the inconstant light as the granite outcrop on which they stood. The man took the measure of his words, while the shrieking wind tore at his beard as if to silence him. "Once," the deep voice began again, "giants dwelt within the earth. Mayhap they dwell there still. Crafty and wise were they, the fashioners of stone and wood, the miners of gems and gold. And in their darkness of chaos they befooled even Crom, the father of gods. By their wiles they stole from him the most precious possession of the immortals, the secret of the silvery metal that, when bent, springs into shape again. Greatly was Crom enraged. The earth trembled and the mountains opened. With blasts of wind and bolts of fire, Crom smote the earth giants. And they fell down, and the earth swallowed them forever. Closing its rocky lips, the earth gulped them down into the bowels of the world, the unknown place where dark things creep and crawl, the place whereof man knoweth naught." The man's eyes blazed like blue flames amid smouldering coals, and his thick black hair, caught by a fierce gust, spread out like the wings of an eagle. Young Conan shuddered. "The battle won," the man went on. "The gods departed for their celestial realm, but, wrathful still, they overlooked the secret of the beaten metal and left it upon the battlefield. There the first men found it, the Atlanteans of legend, our ancestors, before the dawn of history." Conan began to speak, but the man lifted a warning hand. "We, who are men, now hold the secret of steel. But we are not gods, neither are we giants. We are but mortals, weak and foolish, and our days are numbered. Be wary of steel, my son, and hold it in respect, for it carries within it a mystery and a power." "I do not understand, father," faltered the boy. The man shook his black mane. "You will, in time, Conan. Before a man is worthy to bear a sword of steel in battle, a weapon such as the gods once bore against the giants, he must learn its riddle. He must understand the ways of steel. Know that in all the world you can trust no one, neither man nor woman nor beast, neither spirit nor demon nor god. But you can trust a blade of well-forged steel." The man cupped his son's small hands within his own, and, curling the boy's fingers about the hilt of the great sword, said, "The heart of a man is like a piece of unworked iron. It must be hammered by adversity and forged by suffering, and the challenges flung by the thoughtless gods, nigh unto the point of breaking. It must be purged and hardened in the fires of conflict. It must be purified and shaped on the anvil of despair and loss. Only when your heart has become as steel will you be worthy to wield a keen-edged sword in battle and win against your enemies, as did the gods when they conquered the dark giants. When you have mastered the mysteries of steel, my son, your sword will be your very soul." All his life, Conan remembered those words, spoken by his sire on that lightning-riddled night. In time he began to comprehend the cryptic phrases, to understand the message that his father had striven to impart. Out of suffering is born strength. Only through pain and deprivation does a human heart become as strong as steel. But many and long were the years that passed before this wisdom became fully his. Conan likewise remembered another night, a fortnight earlier, when the moon was an opalescent disk hung in the clear black sky like a silvern skull on a sable shroud. The snow glistened in the eerie light, and a chill wind moaned through the snow-tipped pines as he walked through the sleeping village, down the rough road that led to his father's smithy. There a fire blazed red, beating back the darkness. The firelight splashed with shifting hues of gold and crimson the smith's leathern apron and cinder-scorched trousers. It gleamed on his sweat-beaded brow and flickered across the face of the boy, who watched, open-mouthed, from the doorway. Tirelessly, the smith drove the bellows. Then, grasping a pair of long-handled tongs, he drew forth from the heart of the furnace a dazzling length of white-hot iron, flattened and glowing. As he placed it on the anvil and began to hammer it into shape, each ringing blow sprayed a shower of sparks into the ruddy red gloom of the forge. When the cooling core of the iron had turned from white to yellow to dusty red, the smith replaced it in the furnace and resumed his pushing on the bellows. At last he glanced towards the door and saw the boy. His stern gaze gentled. "What are you doing here, son? It's time you were abed." "You told me I could watch you turn the iron into steel, father." "Aye, so I did. With luck, The forging will be done tonight. The folk hereabouts think Niall the smith something of a warlock, turning iron into steel, and I would not want to disappoint them." In truth, the smith was something of a godling to his neighbours. He had come out of the Southlands, bearing within his breast an arcane art, the secret of steel, that precious inheritance from the ancient Atlanteans, believed lost and forgotten by all who lived in this darkling age. As the boy approached, the smith again withdrew the iron from the furnace. "Stand back, Conan, for the sparks fly high. I would not see you harmed." The anvil rang like a bronzen bell, giant smitten. Fountains of sparks rose and fell before the toiling smith. Slowly, the glowing length of iron assumed the shape of a mighty sword blade. Raising the metal into the tongs, he squinted along the edge, detected a curvature, and pounded it out with a few deft strokes. After a final heating and inspection, Niall thrust the glowing brand into a vat of water to temper the malleable metal before its final transformation into steel. The core hissed like a serpent, and a cloud of steam swirled up to invest the smith, for a moment only, in the diaphane garments of a god. "Fetch me yonder bucket of charcoal," said Niall to his awestruck son. "To make steel strong, yet flexible, the blade must now be baked at a constant temperature, as in a charcoal bed. This is the secret possessed of the folk of Atlantis. This is the knowledge I brought hither from the south when I fled my former clan. See, thus I let the fire cool." As the blade lay for days buried beneath a blanket of hot coals, Conan watched his father toil over the remaining tasks. The crossguard he fashioned with a cunning into a form of a stag's antlers. The two-handed grip he wrapped with string made from the gut of forest tigers. The pommel itself, of steel weighted to crush the skulls of foes, he cast into the likeness of the hooves of elk. When at last the weapon was assembled, it was a thing of bright enchantments, of memorable beauty. The polished blade flashed like a mirror, reflecting sunshine and thunderclouds, as if the very fabric of the metal were somehow imbued with the spirits of the air. "Is it done at last, father?" asked the boy one evening. "All but one thing," rumbled the smith. "Come, and you shall see." In after years, Conan remembered how rolling thunderheads blotted out the stars as his father led him from the village of log dwellings into the upper reaches of the snow-clad mountain. As they clambered upward, the wind rose, biting the firs that sheltered them. They traversed white-lipped crevices, rough, flinty slopes, and bald outcrops where scarcely a toehold could be found. Thunder rumbled as they reached the summit. Then the storm broke. Thus, in the fury of the elements, was the mystic rite performed to render the sword invincible. Even upon the heels of that wild night of storm and incantation, Conan came to learn his first lesson in suffering. Cruel that lesson was, and far too early for so young a child. But the Northlands are bleak, life therein is harsh, and the hand of every stranger is lifted in enmity against his fellows. Night shambled off before the silent footfalls of a frozen dawn. The waning moon, disconsolate, draped her face in a drifting veil of clouds. Only a tired wind stirred the silence as it whispered through the branches of the leafless trees. Suddenly, the quiet was fractured by the clamour of horsemen who crashed through the bushes. Their horses, shod in iron, shattered the thin ice of the stream that paralleled the village. Dark and grim, wearing leather armour scaled with iron, and holding axes, spears, and swords in their gloved hands, the raiders swept down upon the hamlet. Men and women, startled from their slumbers, awoke to find the rutted road between their huts blocked by mounted strangers. Confused and disorganized, the villagers emerged from their homes, clutching their coarse woolens about them and shouting at the invaders. One woman shrieked as she snatched a toddler from beneath a horse's prancing hooves. With a roar of triumph, the rider leaned from his saddle to thrust his lance between the shoulders of the fleeing mother. She staggered as the spearhead burst into view between her breasts. Then, limp as a rag doll, she was borne along until the soldier, with an oath, tore the shaft loose from her mangled flesh. "The veneer!" roared Niall the smith as, swinging his blacksmith's hammer, he plunged from the mouth of his hut. Standing on his doorstep, the boy Conan stared in bewilderment, searching for order in the chaos all about him. But there was no order. A young girl darted past him, white with terror. Behind her sped a lean black hound, its jaws agape, its red tongue flapping. An instant later, the beast had pulled her down and worried her throat to crimson ribbons. Before Conan's unbelieving eyes, one of her hands flopped like a beached fish on the mud-spattered snow. A naked Cimmerian hunter, armed with a huge axe, sprang howling into the turmoil and swung his weapon like a wheel of death. It caught one raider on the thigh, hewing his leg away. Shrieking, the van fell from his saddle, his blood spurting a scarlet arc across the snow. Above the clatter of hooves, the clank of iron, and the war cries of the veneer, Conan heard the shrill wails of women and the screams of the maimed and dying. Conan's father pushed past his son, vanished into his hut, and reappeared with the great sword. The ensorcelled blade, which glittered like frozen lightning against the morning sky, swept all before it. Van after van fell from his mount, with entrails spilling out across the trampled, muddy snow. Shaking off the paralysis of fear, Conan snatched up a fallen knife and dove into the fray, determined to stand beside his sire. Although the press of struggling men was far too thick for the boy to hack through, his blade hamstrung one towering dark warrior who stumbled into the path of the blacksmith's sweeping sword. The invader's head, sheared cleanly off, spun through the air like a well-tossed ball, to plop into the mud at Conan's feet. The boy leaped back, nape hairs astir, eyes almost starting from their sockets. Now other Cimmerians ran to make a stand with Niall the smith, but the invaders were mounted and well armed, with breasts sheathed in bronze and iron, while the villagers were half naked and bore only the simple implements they had been able to snatch up. Some carried hoes and rakes, others had retrieved their weapons, a few were armed with shields of boiled hides stretched on wooden frames. But these afforded indifferent protection against the pounding weight of veneer iron. Unable to reach his father, Conan sought out his mother, but in the turmoil and cacophony of the battle, he could not find her. He ran and ducked and dodged as men and horses thundered past. On every side he beheld scenes of mayhem and slaughter. A freshly severed arm lay in the snow, trickling blood, while its fingers still gripped the shaft of a spear. A woman, bearing her babe to safety, hurried by. She stumbled and fell in the slippery mud. A heartbeat later, a hoof crushed her skull, and the puling infant fell into a bank of blood-stained snow. An old man was arrested in mid-cry as a bronze-tipped arrow transfixed his tongue. Another crouched in a pool of icy mud, pouring at his face. Conan realized dimly that one eyeball hung by a strand of tissue, and that the man, crazed by pain, was trying to restore the eye to its proper resting place. Over the crash and clamour, Conan heard his father's uplifted voice. "The horses! Kill the horses!" So saying, the smith brought down a warhorse, which screamed like a stallion beneath the gelding iron, as his sword sheared through its spine. Conan at last spied the lithe figure of his mother, standing barefoot in the snow. There was a majesty about her as she faced the enemy, her face flushed with fury, her hair cascading over her shoulders, and her hands clenched about the handle of a broadsword. Heaped before her lay the bloody remains of several Vanir and their merciless dogs. As the boy hurtled towards her, she glanced at her son's tousled mane of coarse black hair, so like his father's, and grasped her weapon with renewed determination. Looking up, Conan glimpsed a gigantic figure bestriding a sable stallion, like a statue, dark and motionless. Horse and rider loomed above the brow of a hillock at the edge of the village, and stared down upon the scene of carnage. The child could not discern the features of the giant form, but his frantic eye was arrested by the emblem that the horseman bore upon his armoured breast and iron-bound shield. It was a strange device. Two black serpents, face to face, their tails so interwoven that they might be one. And between them, supported by their coils, the disk of a black sun. The symbol, unfamiliar as it was, filled Conan's heart with fear and foreboding. Not far away, most of the men and youths who had survived the charge and its resultant slaughter had formed a living shield about their smith. Towering above even the tallest of the other Cimmerians, Niall cried out his martial encouragements, as metal belled against metal and masked the screams of the dying. The Vanir fell back, when their horses, wild-eyed, wheeled and danced before the rude weapons of the defenders. As caution stayed the raiders, from the swelling ground the mailed figure raised one gloved hand in a gesture of command. Dawn fire flashed from his iron helmet, which, concealing his features, lent him an aura of terrible power. "They'll bring up their archers," whispered Conan's mother. "They'll cut our menfolk down as they stand beyond the range of our Cimmerian steel." "Crom, help us," murmured the boy. Conan's mother gave him an icy glance. "Crom does not heed the prayers of men. He scarcely hears them. Crom is a god of frosts and stars and storms, not of humankind." Soon were the words of Maeve, the blacksmith's wife, proven true. A hail of arrows whistled through the dawn, to thud against the wooden huts, to glance from shields, and to sink, feather deep, into naked flesh. Again and again the deathly rain of Vanir arrows swept the cluster of defenders, until the shield wall sagged and crumbled. At last the gigantic figure upon the hillock spoke, his deep, unearthly voice tolling like an iron bell. "Loose the hounds!" Snarling and snapping, the red-tongued dogs panted down the slope, their flying forms silhouetted against the vermilion dawn. One Cimmerian fell, gurgling, with a hound at his throat. Another speared one beast in mid-leap. A third yelled hoarsely as wolf-sharp fangs closed on the muscles of his upper arm. And the wall of shields came apart, as men turned to strike with notched and blunted swords at the vicious animals.
"Archers!"
boomed the dark giant.
"Let fly another round!"
A hissing hail of death fell on the surviving few. Bodies writhed in the trampled snow as their fellow villagers staggered back, their hide shields pierced by the flying shafts. For a moment, Conan saw his father standing alone, his shield bristling with arrows. Then a shaft caught the blacksmith in the leg, piercing the muscle of his upper thigh. The injured limb gave way beneath him. With a choked curse, he fell and lay on his back in the frozen slush. One hand crawled across the ice, inching towards the hilt of the great steel sword. An arrow pinned his hand to the ground. Then the dogs were at him. It was soon over.